My hands are inside a dead man's chest, and I cannot stop moving them. The mud beneath my knees is not mud anymore. It is something thicker, warmer, mixed with promethium runoff that makes the ground slick and chemical-smelling. My fingers work through tissue that no longer responds, searching for bleeds I know I cannot stop, compressing a heart that stopped beating 3 minutes ago while my mind was still cataloguing the injuries, still running through the sequence of interventions that doctrine demands. His eyes are open. They stare past me at a sky choked black with smoke, lit only by the distant flashes of artillery that thunder like the heartbeat he no longer has. The sound creates a rhythm I have learned to work by, my hands moving in time with explosions that shake the ground and send fresh waves of wounded crawling toward the medici station. I can taste copper. Blood spray caught me when his lung collapsed, and now it coats my teeth, my tongue, mixing with the chemical bite of counterseptic that I slathered across my hands hours ago. The smell is worse than the taste. Burning flesh from the promethium fires that rage across the eastern ridge. The sweet rot of gut wounds. The acrid sting of the stims I inject into dying men to keep them conscious long enough to tell me where it hurts. My medikit sits open beside me in the mud, its contents scattered like the entrails of some mechanical beast. Gauze soaked through and discarded. Suture needles bent from use. Stim injectors empty and spent. The inside of the kit's lid is rough beneath my thumb when I reach for another compress. Rough because I have carved names into the metal. Layer upon layer of them. 8,000 scratches for 8,000 men who have passed through my hands. I know this guardsman is dead. I have known since I pressed my fingers against his throat and felt nothing but the thready ghost of a pulse that existed only because I wanted it to. I have known since I saw the way his chest wound bubbled with each breath, air escaping through holes that should never exist in human tissue. I have known since his eyes went distant, focusing on something beyond the smoke and fire and the hell of Galax Prime. But my hands keep working because stopping would mean something I cannot yet name. It would mean accepting that the 317 other times I have done this, the motions were just as futile. That the sutures and stims and desperate compressions are not medicine but ritual, a prayer offered to the god of flesh that has no power to answer. The artillery rhythm changes, coming closer now, and I realize I need to move. The line is collapsing again. There will be more wounded soon, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, crawling and limping and being dragged toward this shell crater that serves as our forward medici station. They will need my hands, need the contents of my kit, need me to perform the sorting that doctrine demands. I pull my hands free from the guardsman's chest. They are red to the wrists, steaming slightly in the cold night air. I do not remember his name. I never asked it. There is no point in asking anymore. No point in carving another scratch into metal that has no more room for names. His eyes are still open, still staring at that smoke-choked sky. I reach up with blood-slick fingers and close them, a final gesture that regulations say is wasteful, that the commissars would call sentimental weakness. But in this moment, on this battlefield, with the thunder of artillery growing closer and the screams of the wounded beginning to rise from the darkness, it is the only mercy I have left to give, the only mercy any of us have left. I rise from the mud, and the motion carries me back through 7 years of war on Galax Prime. This world was a factory planet once, before the orcs came. The refineries still stand in skeletal silhouette against the burning horizon, their smokestacks twisted by artillery fire into shapes that resemble the bones of some ancient beast. The greenskins wanted the manufactorums, the mineral wealth buried in the planet's crust, the strategic position in a sector that would give them access to 3 more systems. We wanted to deny them. 7 years later, neither side has won, and the planet has become a graveyard that processes the living into the dead with industrial efficiency. The regiments defending Garlex are a patchwork of desperation. Cadian survivors from the fall, their eyes still carrying the shock of watching their homeworld break apart. Mordian conscripts who march in perfect formation even when the ground beneath them runs red. Penal legionnaires from a dozen forgotten worlds, their sins tattooed across their shaved scalps, fighting for redemption they will never receive. We are held together not by faith or brotherhood, but by the commissariat's bolt pistols and the simple mathematics of survival. I came from a schola medicae on a civilized world, whose name I sometimes struggle to remember. They trained me in the arts of healing, in anatomy and pharmacology, and the sacred duty of preserving the Emperor's servants. I believed I would serve in a chirurgian's theater behind the lines, using my skills to restore broken soldiers to health, to return them to their families and their lives. I believed medicine was about saving people. I learned the truth in my first week on Galax Prime. Astra Militarum Medicae are not healers. We are logistics officers for human resources. Our purpose is not to save lives, but to return soldiers to combat effectiveness as quickly as possible. The wounded are sorted into 3 categories, and this sorting is the most important skill we possess, more vital than sutures or stims or any knowledge of the body's mysteries. Category 1. Those who can fight again within hours. A lasgun burn that has not penetrated deep tissue, a broken finger that can be splintered, shock that can be countered with a stim injection, and a kick to the ribs. These men receive immediate treatment and are sent back to their units before their squads have finished the engagement. Category 2. Those who can fight again within weeks. Shattered limbs that require setting, deep tissue damage that needs time to heal, infections that have not yet turned septic. These men are stabilized, tagged, and shipped to rear echelon Medicae stations where they will be processed, repaired, and returned to the front as soon as their bodies can hold a las rifle steady. Category 3. Those who will never fight again. Spinal damage, catastrophic burns, wounds to vital organs that even augmetic replacement cannot fix quickly enough to matter. Men who have simply taken too much damage, whose bodies have become liabilities rather than assets. These men receive the Emperor's mercy, a bolt through the skull or a lethal dose of obscura, and their equipment is stripped for redistribution before their bodies cool. Efficiency, conservation of resources. The Departamento Militarum sends us supplies calculated down to the last gauze roll, the last stim injector. We are expected to process casualties like a manufacturer processes raw materials, sorting the salvageable from the waste, keeping the machine of war running smoothly. I understand now what I am. Not a physician sworn to preserve life. Not a healer guided by the principle that every human soul has value. I am a technician maintaining equipment, and the equipment is made of flesh and screams and bleeds and dies. But that does not change the fundamental nature of my purpose. The guardsman whose eyes I just closed was Category 3 from the moment I saw him. I knew it instantly, the way you know a machine part is too damaged for repair. But I worked on him anyway, my hands moving through the ritual even though the outcome was predetermined. Perhaps that is the only mercy left to us. Not saving lives, but refusing to acknowledge how little our efforts matter. The mercy comes 3 days later, carried into my station on a stretcher fashioned from a blown-out door panel. They bring me a boy, 16 standard years at most, his face still soft with youth beneath the grime and blood. His entire left side has been shredded by orc shooter fire, the crude rounds tearing through ceramic armor like it was parchment. I can see his intestines, grey-pink coils glistening in the harsh light of the lumens. His femur is shattered into fragments that grind together with each labored breath, making sounds that bones should never make. Category 3. The assessment is instant, automatic. I reach for the bolt pistol that hangs from my belt. Then his eyes find mine. They are blue, impossibly blue against the blood and mud caking his face. He is conscious, aware, and there is something in his gaze that I cannot name. Not pleading exactly, though there is that too. Something older, something that understands what the bolt pistol means and is asking me to choose differently. My hand stops, hovers, falls away from the pistol and reaches instead for my medikit. I do not know why, cannot explain it to myself even as I begin working. My hands moving through procedures I have not attempted in years because they are wasteful, because they use supplies that could save 3 Category 1 cases instead of 1 Category 3. I pack the abdominal wound with gauze soaked in counterseptic, my fingers working inside him to tie off bleeders that regulations say should be left to finish their work. I inject stims directly into his heart to keep it beating through the shock. I splint his shattered femur with plasteel strips meant for fortification repairs, binding them tight while he bites down on a leather strap and makes sounds that are not quite screams. It takes 4 hours. 4 hours during which artillery shakes dust from the makeshift ceiling, during which Sergeant Kyle gives me looks that say I am wasting time and resources on a corpse that has not yet accepted its condition. 4 hours during which the boy's eyes never leave my face, holding onto me like I am an anchor in a drowning sea. He survives. Against all probability, against every statistical model I have learned, against the cold mathematics of combat medicine, he survives. I feel something I have not felt in years. Pride. Not in following doctrine or maintaining efficiency, but in the work itself, in the craft of healing that I studied so long ago on a civilized world that seems like a dream now. I have cheated death. I have used my skills to save a life rather than simply sorting salvage from waste. I visit him during recovery, learn his name is Petter. He is from an agri-world called Thessia Minor, a place that no longer exists, scoured clean by the same orc war that brought him here. His family died in the first raids. He was conscripted at 14, shipped to Galax with a lass rifle and 3 days of training. He thanks me in a voice still weak from trauma, tells me he will fight harder now, serve the Emperor better, make my efforts worthwhile. For 3 days, I believe I have done something meaningful. Then the commissar arrives. He reviews my medical logs with cold efficiency, his augmetic eye clicking as it processes the data. He examines Peter, makes him stand, walk, hold a las rifle in firing position. The boy manages all of it, though his left arm shakes and his gait is an uneven limp that will never fully heal. The commissar declares him fit for duty. I watch Peter march away toward the front lines, his silhouette diminishing against the burning horizon. He carries a las rifle he can barely aim, walks on a leg that will fail him when he needs it most, goes back to the war that will kill him within days or weeks at most. I have not saved him. I have simply delayed his death and added to his suffering, given him just enough function to be useful one more time. This is what my job truly means. Not healing, but maintenance. Not mercy, but efficiency. I understand now why Sergeant Kyle looked at me that way. He was not questioning my waste of resources. He was pitying me for learning the truth so late. The pattern reveals itself slowly, like rot spreading through clean tissue. After Peter, I begin to notice what I have been seeing, but not acknowledging for months. The Medici station processes an endless stream of broken bodies, and we, Sergeant Kale, Sister Morna, young Davos and myself, have become part of a machinery that grinds human beings into useful components. Kyle has been doing this for 12 years. He moves through the wounded with the efficiency of a manufacturing worker, his hands quick and sure, his face empty of expression. He does not learn names, does not meet eyes. When a guardsman screams, Kyle injects Obscura without hesitation, not to ease suffering, but to silence noise that disrupts concentration. He tried mercy once, he tells me during a rare moment of rest. Tried to save everyone. It nearly broke him. Now he saves no one, just sorts and processes and moves to the next case. Sister Morna came from the Adepta Sororitas, a failed hospitaller who could not maintain the faith required for her order. She prays constantly while she works, her lips moving in silent litany, but her prayers sound increasingly like curses. Her hands shake when she administers the Emperor's mercy, which she does more frequently than regulations require. I think she is trying to save them from something worse than death, though she will not say what. Davos is 19, fresh from a scholar medicae on a world that has never seen war. He still believes our work matters, still thinks we are healing rather than processing. I watch this belief die slowly in his eyes with each shift, each case that returns to us for a second and third time. Each moment when he realizes that the man he saved yesterday is the same man dying today with new wounds layered over old scars. The horrors accumulate. Small at first, easy to ignore, but they build like sediment until I am drowning in them. There is the guardsman who loses both legs to a mine, but returns to the station 3 weeks later, strapped into a heavy weapon mount, asking me to fix the augmetic feeds because they are causing infection. He cannot walk, cannot evacuate if his position is overrun, but he can fire a heavy bolter, so command considers him combat effective. There is the soldier who begs me for death, not because his wounds are fatal, but because he understands the pattern now. He knows I will patch him up, send him back, and he will return again and again, each time with less of himself remaining, until there is nothing left to repair, and he finally qualifies for Category 3. He asks me to skip the middle steps, to grant mercy now while he is still human enough to want it. I cannot. Regulations forbid it. He is Category 2, salvageable, and so he must be salvaged. There is the discovery I make while reviewing supply logs, tracking the stims we inject to restore combat effectiveness. The formulation is destroying their nervous systems, slowly but inevitably. Tremors, seizures, cognitive decline. But command considers this acceptable because a guardsman only needs to survive long enough to fire his Lazrafal one more time. The long-term effects are someone else's problem, likely the Emperor's problem when they receive his mercy for unrelated wounds. I begin a private ritual that night. I take a scalpel and scratch a name into the inside of my medikit lid. The guardsman who died in the mud with my hands inside his chest. Then another name, and another. Each one a small act of remembrance, of rebellion against the doctrine that says efficiency matters more than identity. The names accumulate faster than I expect. Within a week, the inside of the lid is covered. I carve them smaller, fitting more into the available space, layering them over each other until the metal becomes rough beneath my fingers. I run my thumb across them during quiet moments, feeling the texture of all these deaths, these men who passed through my hands and disappeared into the grinding machinery of war. Regulations forbid this. Remembering the dead is inefficient, sentimental, a waste of mental resources that should be devoted to processing the living. But I cannot stop. The names are the only proof that they existed, that they mattered, that their deaths were not simply acceptable losses in some commissar's casualty report. I am becoming what Kyle warned me against. Someone who cares enough to be broken by caring. The names stop mattering when the offensive begins. The orcs mass for a final push on the eastern manufactorums, and command orders a counterattack that sends 60,000 guardsmen into a killing field of artillery and crude orc guns. The wounded come in waves, dozens at first, then hundreds, then so many that we stop counting and simply work, our hands moving through blood-soaked blur, while the world narrows to the next case, the next wound, The next decision between salvage and waste. 72 hours. That is how long the offensive lasts. How long we work without sleep, sustained by stims that make our hearts race and our hands shake, but keep us upright and functional. The Medicaid tent becomes a charnel house, the ground sticky with fluids that are not entirely mud, the air thick with the smell of burned flesh and counterseptic, and bowels opened by shrapnel. My hands become automatic. I stop seeing the guardsmen as people and begin seeing them as puzzles to solve, systems to repair, meat to process. This one needs a tourniquet and stims. Send him back. That one has a sucking chest wound. Seal it and tag him for transport. The one in the corner with the grey face and the abdominal wound that will not stop bleeding. Category 3. Next case. The detachment feels like survival at first. A necessary distance that allows me to function, to make the rapid assessments that doctrine demands without being paralyzed by empathy or horror. But slowly I realize it is something else. Not survival, but a form of death, the erosion of whatever made me choose medicine, the transformation of a healer into a technician who processes flesh the way a manufacturer processes ore. Sister Morna breaks on the second day. She is attempting to reattach a severed arm, her sutures precise despite exhaustion, when something inside her simply fractures. She begins laughing, high and brittle, while tears stream down her face. Her hands keep working, but her mouth moves in prayers that sound increasingly like curses, entreaties to the Emperor that ask not for strength or guidance, but for explanation, for justification, for some reason why this suffering must exist. They sedate her, carry her away, still muttering, still weeping. I watch her go and feel nothing except relief that we have one fewer pair of hands to coordinate around. Davos dies on the third day. A stray artillery shell finds our tent, threading through the gaps in our void shield coverage with the cruel mathematics of probability. The explosion scatters him across the operating table where he had been working seconds before, his body reduced to component elements mixed with the guardsman he was trying to save. Both of them Category 3 now, both requiring the same cleanup procedure. I step over what remains of Davos and continue working on my current case. My hands do not shake. My assessment does not waver. I feel nothing at his death, just irritation at the mess, at the loss of an extra pair of hands, at the disruption to workflow that his absence creates. This absence of grief terrifies me more than anything I have witnessed on Galax Prime, more than the mountains of corpses, more than the guardsmen who beg for death, more than Sister Morna's breakdown or the names carved into my medikit that I can no longer bring myself to read. I have become what the Imperium requires, what doctrine demands, and in becoming it, I have lost something essential that I cannot name but know is gone. That night, when the offensive finally ends and the last of the wounded have been processed, I try to pray. The words come automatically, rituals learned in childhood on a civilized world that seems like someone else's memory. I kneel in the mud beside my medikit, my hands folded in the proper form, my lips moving through the liturgies that are supposed to bring comfort and connection to the Emperor's light. But the words are hollow in my mouth. Sounds without meaning, rituals performed without belief. Faith worn away like stone underwater, eroded so slowly I did not notice it happening, until nothing remained but the shape of what used to be there. I am empty, efficient, exactly what the machinery of war requires, and I cannot remember why this feels wrong. The emptiness does not last. 3 weeks after the offensive ends, they bring me Pater. I am sorting through a batch of wounded from a skirmish on the northern ridge when I hear his voice. Weak, bubbling with fluid, but unmistakable. He is calling my name. Not for a Medicae orderly, not for help, but for me, specifically. Tyvan, he remembers. They carry him on the same type of improvised stretcher he arrived on before. Another door panel slick with blood. But this time there will be no 4-hour surgery, no violation of doctrine, no cheating death through skill and stubborn refusal to accept the mathematics of trauma. An orc blade has opened him from sternum to pelvis. The wound is vertical, precise in its brutality, and through it I can see everything that should remain hidden. His internal organs steam in the cold air, grey and pink and red, glistening wetly in the harsh light of the lumens. His intestines have spilled partially out, coiled on his stomach like obscene rope. I can see his diaphragm moving with each labored breath, see his heart beating in its cage of ribs, see the damage that no amount of gauze or sutures or stims can reverse. Category 3. Obvious, immediate, merciful. But he is conscious, will remain conscious for perhaps 10 more minutes, his body too damaged to sustain life, but not yet damaged enough to grant the peace of unconsciousness. His blue eyes find mine, and there is recognition in them, something almost like joy. "Medicae, Harrow," he whispers, blood running from the corners of his mouth. "I knew I would see you again." I kneel beside him, my hands automatically reaching for my medikit before I stop myself. There is nothing in that kit that matters now, nothing that can change what the next 10 minutes will bring. "I am here, Petter," I say, and my voice sounds strange to my own ears, almost human. He smiles. Blood coats his teeth, makes the expression grotesque, but it is genuine. "I wanted to thank you," he says, each word an effort that costs him more than he has to spare, "for saving me, for giving me more time." The words strike me like a physical blow. More time. 3 weeks of limping on a shattered femur that never healed properly. 3 weeks of holding a lasrafel with an arm that shook and failed him when he needed it most. 3 weeks of waiting for this moment, for the orc blade that would finish what I had interrupted. "You gave me a gift," he continues, his voice growing weaker. "I could have died on a table, meaningless, wasted, but you sent me back. Let me die in battle, serving the Emperor. Die with purpose." He is grateful, genuinely, sincerely grateful for the 3 weeks of additional suffering I inflicted on him, for the agony of being torn apart by an orc blade while his barely healed body failed to respond to his desperate need for speed, for strength, for the physical capacity to survive. "The Emperor protects," he whispers, and there is such faith in his voice, such absolute conviction that his death means something, that the suffering was holy, that dying in service is the highest purpose a human can achieve. I understand then, not just the logistics, not just the sorting of salvage from waste, but the deeper machinery I am part of, the spiritual architecture of the Imperium itself, which transforms suffering into virtue, waste into glory, meaningless death into holy sacrifice. The Imperial Creed has taught Peter that his agony is blessed, that his death is meaningful, that I did him a kindness by sending him back to die slowly instead of quickly. He dies with that smile still on his face, blood running down his chin, his blue eyes fixed on something beyond the smoke-choked sky. Dies believing that his life had value, that his service mattered, that the 3 weeks of pain I gave him were a gift rather than cruelty disguised as mercy. I have not been saving lives. I have been maintaining the illusion that life in the Imperial Guard has value beyond its capacity for violence. I have been the mechanism that keeps guardsmen believing their suffering serves a purpose, that their deaths mean something, that the machinery grinding them into nothing is holy rather than simply inevitable. The truth of it settles over me like ash, and I cannot pray it away. The truth changes me in ways I do not immediately recognize. I continue my work the next day, and the day after, my hands moving through the familiar motions of triage and treatment. But something fundamental has broken inside me. some essential component that held together the machinery of purpose and duty. I feel it missing the way you feel a missing tooth, your tongue constantly returning to the gap where something used to be. I stop carving names into my medikit. There is no more room, the metal worn rough with layer upon layer of scratches, but that is not why I stop. The ritual feels obscene now, a pretense that individual deaths matter in a war that consumes worlds. What difference does it make if I remember their names when the Imperium has already forgotten they existed? When their deaths are filed away as acceptable losses in casualty reports that no one will ever read? I begin to make different calculations. The wounded still come in their endless stream, and I still sort them into categories, but the criteria have changed. I no longer ask who can return to combat effectiveness most quickly. I ask who is suffering most, who needs the release that only the Emperor's mercy can provide. The guardsman with the gut wound who will take 3 days to die, screaming through the obscura that does nothing to dull the agony of peritonitis. I grant him mercy, even though regulations say he should be stabilized and transported. Category 2, officially, but I reclassify him with a stroke of my stylus and a bolt round through the skull. The soldier whose legs were crushed beneath a collapsed trench wall, who begs me with his eyes because his jaw is shattered and he cannot speak. The augmetics could be fitted eventually. Command would consider him salvageable for a heavy weapons mount, but I see the desperation in his gaze, the plea for an end to suffering that regulations forbid me from granting. I grant it anyway, and falsify the report to say he died of shock before treatment could be administered. Sergeant Kyle notices. I see him watching me, see the way his eyes track my movements through the wounded, see him reviewing the casualty logs with attention he has not shown in years. But he says nothing. Perhaps he understands. Perhaps he has traveled this same dark road and recognizes the markers of apostasy when he sees them in another. The commissar notices too. He begins to watch me more closely, his augmetic eye clicking as it processes data, comparing my casualty rates to expected norms, looking for patterns that might indicate dereliction of duty. He cannot prove anything yet, but he suspects. I can feel his suspicion like weight on my shoulders, heavy as the medikit I carry. I find myself envying the dead. Not the way they died, not the violence or the pain, but the simple fact of their completion. Their service is ended. Their suffering is over. They have escaped the grinding machinery that processes the living into corpses with excruciating slowness. I envy even the orcs. At least they die in service to something they chose. Some savage joy in violence rather than the grinding obligation that powers the Imperial Guard. They fight because they want to, because battle brings them pleasure. We fight because we must, because refusal means execution, because the Commissariat's bolt pistol ensures compliance even when faith has failed. I begin to see the Imperium clearly for the first time, not as the glorious realm of mankind that the preachers describe, not as the last bastion of human civilization against the darkness, but as a machine that runs on human suffering, a vast engine that requires the death of millions daily to sustain itself, that transforms mercy into weakness and compassion into heresy, that grinds entire worlds into dust and calls it holy. I am not yet a traitor. I do not know what I would even betray to. The enemies of the Imperium offer nothing but different forms of damnation, different flavors of horror. But my faith in the Emperor, in the righteousness of mankind's cause, in the meaning of my own service, has become a hollow shell. Words without conviction, prayers without belief. I still say the liturgies when the commissar is watching, still make the sign of the aquila over the dead. But the gestures are empty now, performances rather than expressions of faith. The God I once believed in, if he ever existed, has been replaced by something colder and crueler, and I cannot worship at that altar even to save myself. The apostasy becomes action when the line breaks for the final time. The orcs commit everything to one last assault, a tide of green flesh and crude iron that crashes against our positions with the weight of inevitability. The defensive line holds for 6 hours, then 12, then simply ceases to exist as a coherent structure. Command orders a fighting retreat, and the Medici station receives evacuation protocols that make the mathematics explicit for the first time. Save those who can walk and fight. Grant the Emperor's mercy to the rest. The commissar brings me a bolt pistol and a data slate. The slate contains a list of names, 347 of them, guardsmen currently in our care who do not meet the evacuation criteria. I have 4 hours before the transport departs. After that, the orcs will overrun this position, and anyone left behind will die slowly under their blades and hammers. Sergeant Kyle appears beside me, his face as empty as always. He takes the data slate, scrolls through half the names, and nods once. We do not speak. There is nothing to say that has not already been said in the silence between us over these long months. Sister Morna is already gone, evacuated 3 weeks ago, deemed mentally unfit for continued service. Perhaps she was the lucky one. Perhaps her breakdown was not weakness but wisdom, the recognition that some burdens cannot be carried without breaking. I begin moving through the rows of wounded. The bolt pistol is heavy in my hand, heavier than it should be, as if the weight of 347 lives has been compressed into its metal frame. Some of the guardsmen are unconscious, lost in obscura dreams or blood loss. For them it is easy, merciful even, a simple pressure of metal against skull and a pull of the trigger. Others are awake. They know what the bolt pistol means, why I am moving through the rows with such purpose. Some beg for their lives, pleading in voices made hoarse by screaming. Some accept their fate with the fatalism of the Imperial Creed, reciting prayers as I approach, making the sign of the Aquila with trembling hands. Some curse me, curse the Emperor, curse the Imperium itself, their final words filled with the bitter recognition of what their service has earned them. I administer the Emperor's mercy methodically, professionally, my hands steady even as something deep inside me screams. I recognize faces, guardsmen I have treated before, men whose names were carved into my medikit before I stopped believing that remembrance mattered. Each one receives the same service, the same swift end, regardless of whether they beg or pray or curse. I am 3/4 through my portion of the list when I reach a veteran sergeant named Coral. I treated him twice before, once for a shrapnel wound that left his face scarred, once for a broken arm that healed badly. He is gut-shot now, the kind of wound that takes days to kill, infection spreading through the abdominal cavity, while pain builds to levels that even Obscura cannot touch. I raise the bolt pistol. He catches my wrist with his good hand, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so close to death. His eyes meet mine, and there is something in them I have not seen in the other guardsmen. Not fear or acceptance or anger, but recognition. "You know this is wrong," he says. I understand immediately that he does not mean the mercy killing. He is gut-shot, dying, and the bolt round will save him from days of agony. He means everything else, the entire structure of waste and suffering and meaningless death. The machinery that brought us both to this moment, him dying on a stretcher, and me standing over him with a weapon in my hand. The Imperium itself, which transforms human beings into resources to be expended and calls it holy service. I cannot answer, cannot find words that would justify or explain or even acknowledge the truth he has spoken. I can only pull the trigger, adding his name to the list of those I have killed in the Emperor's name, and move on to the next case. The mercy continues. The list grows shorter, and in 4 hours, I will board an evacuation transport leaving behind the bodies of 347 guardsmen who who trusted the Imperium to value their service. The list ends with 15 minutes remaining before evacuation. I have executed 346 guardsmen in 4 hours. My hands are steady, my assessments swift, my technique efficient. The bolt pistol has become an extension of my arm, no different from the scalpels and sutures I once used to save lives. I have become precisely what the Imperium requires, a technician who processes human resources according to regulations and doctrine. The final name belongs to a young guardsman I do not recognize. He is unconscious, lost in obscura-induced sleep, or perhaps simple blood loss. Both his legs are gone below the knee, amputated cleanly by shrapnel, or perhaps by one of us during an earlier triage. The wounds are sealed, the bleeding controlled, the stumps wrapped in clean gauze that someone took the time to apply properly. He could survive. His vitals are stable, his breathing regular. With transport to a rear echelon Medicae station, proper care, time to heal, he would live. But he would never fight again. Never hold a las rifle, never march with his squad, never serve the Imperium in the capacity that regulations define as useful. Category 3. The assessment is automatic, written into the protocols that govern every decision I have made today. According to the list, according to regulations, according to the mathematics of military logistics that reduce human life to calculations of combat effectiveness, he should die. One bolt round through the skull, swift and merciful, and my duty would be complete. I stand over him, bolt pistol in hand, and something shifts inside me. Not breaking, because I broke weeks ago when Peter died thanking me for his suffering. Not awakening, because I have been awake to the horror for longer than I can remember. Something quieter, something that might be called choice. I realize that I am not deciding whether this guardsman lives or dies. That decision has already been made by forces far beyond my control, by the grinding machinery of war that will kill him eventually, whether I pull this trigger or not. I am deciding what kind of person I will be in this moment, whether I will administer mercy because regulations demand it, making myself simply another component in the imperial machine, or whether I will refuse, will save this one life not because it serves the Imperium, but because it serves nothing except the idea that life itself has value beyond its utility. The choice is meaningless in the scope of the war. This guardsman will likely die in transit, or be sorted Category 3 at the next Medicae station, by someone who follows regulations more faithfully than I do. Saving him changes nothing about the war, nothing about the Imperium, nothing about the endless grinding consumption of human life that powers our species' survival. But it changes me. Or perhaps it reveals what remains of who I was before Galax Prime taught me the truth about service. I holster the bolt pistol. The weight leaves my hand, and I feel lighter despite everything. I bend down and gather the unconscious guardsman in my arms, lifting him with a strength I did not know I still possessed. He is surprisingly light, diminished by injury and blood loss, reduced to something less than he was, but still human, still alive, still worth the effort of carrying. The commissar sees me moving toward the evacuation point instead of away from it. His shouts echo across the Medicae station, orders to complete my duty, threats of court-martial and execution for dereliction. I ignore him. Sergeant Cale appears beside me, his face unreadable, his voice low with warning. "You know what this means," he says. I know this is futile. Know this guardsman's survival is temporary at best. Know I am throwing away whatever remains of my career and possibly my life for a gesture that will be forgotten before the transport leaves atmosphere. But I also know that I cannot pull that trigger, cannot execute this final name on the list, cannot become completely what the Imperium has tried to make me. I choose to be a healer rather than a logistics officer. I choose to remember what I believed before the war taught me that belief was weakness. I choose to save one life, not because it matters in any measurable way, but because the act of choosing matters to me. The evacuation transport's engines roar to life behind me as I carry my final patient toward whatever fate awaits us both. The evacuation succeeds. Against probability, against my expectations, the guardsman survives transport. I watch them carry him off to a rear echelon medici station, still unconscious, still missing both legs, still Category 3 by any rational assessment, but alive. I do not know his name. I never learned it. Perhaps that is fitting. The court-martial takes 3 days. The charges are explicit: dereliction of duty, failure to follow evacuation protocols, prioritizing individual life over military necessity. The evidence is comprehensive. The commissar presents casualty logs showing my declining efficiency, testimony from other Medicaid staff about my unauthorized mercy killings, documentation of the final guardsman I saved instead of executing as ordered. I do not defend myself. There is no defense that would satisfy a tribunal concerned only with regulations and doctrine. I saved a man who could not return to combat effectiveness. By the Imperium's mathematics, I wasted resources that could have been allocated elsewhere. The fact that he was human, that his life had value beyond his capacity for violence, is not relevant to military logistics. The sentence is reduction in rank and transfer to a penal legion's Medicaid Corps. The judge does not say what everyone in the chamber understands. This is a death sentence with extra steps. Penal legions are sent to the worst battlefields, given the most desperate assignments, expected to die in service of redemption they will never achieve. Their Medicaid staff die alongside them, processing casualties in conditions that make Galax Prime look merciful by comparison. I accept the sentence without comment. Perhaps I have been looking for this, for an end that comes with purpose rather than simply fading into the emptiness that has consumed so many of my colleagues. Perhaps this is the only way I know how to escape the machinery that has ground away everything I once believed. They give me 2 days before transport off-world. I spend them in a holding cell, alone with thoughts I can no longer organize into prayers or justifications. The Emperor's name feels foreign in my mouth now, a word belonging to someone else's faith. On the final day, Sergeant Kyle finds me. He does not speak, does not offer comfort or condemnation. He simply places my medikit on the table between us, the metal case scratched and dented from years of service, and walks away. I open it slowly. The supplies have been removed, redistributed to Medicaid staff who still follow regulations, who still sort human beings into categories of utility. But the inside of the lid remains, covered with layer upon layer of carved names. 8,000 scratches, maybe more, each one a guardsman who passed through my hands and disappeared into the grinding machinery of war. Kyle says nothing, but I understand. The names matter. Even if no one else remembers them, even if the Imperium considers remembrance a weakness, even if faith in the Emperor has been replaced by something quieter and more human. They matter because I chose to make them matter, because the act of remembering is itself a form of resistance against the mathematics that reduces life to logistics. The transport that carries me off-world is a bulk hauler converted for prisoner transport. Its hold crowded with penal legionnaires and failed soldiers being shipped to their final assignments. I sit in the darkness, the medikit on my lap, and run my fingers over the carved names. Each one a small rebellion against the doctrine that says individual deaths are acceptable losses. Each one proof that they existed, that they were human, that they mattered at least to me. I do not know if what I did was right. I do not know if mercy has any meaning in a galaxy that runs on cruelty. I do not know if I still believe in the Emperor or the Imperium, or anything beyond the simple act of remembering that the dead were once alive and deserved to be remembered. My hands touch metal worn rough by names, and the gesture mirrors that first moment on Galax Prime when my hands were buried in a dead man's chest, trying to save what could not be saved. But now I am not trying to save the living. I am simply remembering the dead, and in that quiet act of remembrance, there is something that might be called hope, or might simply be the last delusion of a man who cannot accept that healing has no place in the machinery of eternal war.